We just hit 50,000 subscribers here on the channel, folks. I am blown away, and it's hard to believe that there's even 50,000 people out there who know what a mandolin is, much less who would subscribe to a channel like this. So just huge thanks to all you folks for watching and for following along with me on this journey. You know, it's been about 10 years since I started this YouTube channel, and it started out just as a way of making myself practice more with this Mandolin Monday series that I started in 2014, posting a new video of what I was working on every week. It evolved to incorporating other guest mandolin players, and it's been going for over 400 consecutive weeks now, which is crazy. Then during 2020, when everything changed, my focus really shifted to start making lesson videos here and review videos and mandolin commentary videos and all sorts of stuff that you see on the channel now. And the channel has just grown so much since then. I think we started 2020 at 4,000 subscribers, and now here we are at 50, just 4 short years later. So today we're celebrating by doing a special Q&A video. I recently reached out to all of my followers over on social media and Patreon to ask me anything, you know, mandolin related or otherwise, and we're gonna answer those questions today in this video. But I don't think I'm gonna wear this the entire video here. So first up, we have a question from Robin Sullivan over on my Patreon page. What's up, Robin? Robin says, congratulations, David. Since I'm a novice at this, I have one basic question. What's your recommended practice time for someone like me? Most times I practice through about 15 or 20 minutes, 5 days a week. I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. Scales, 1 or 2 songs, repeat, and done. I know the feeling, Robin, yeah. That's a great question, and it reminds me of something I heard Chris Thiele say one time. I think he was at a workshop and someone asked him a similar question, and he replied by saying that he felt like he had to play at least 2 hours a day to not get any worse at the mandolin, which is crazy to think that you would have a 2-hour deficit before you started to see any improvement from your practice time. And I don't think that's really true of anyone else besides Chris Thiele, but it just goes to show how much time the pros really spend at their craft. I've also heard from a reliable source about Thiele how sometimes he'll pick up the mandolin in the morning and before he knows it, 13 hours has gone by and he's forgotten to eat because he's just been so engrossed in practicing the mandolin, which is crazy. And I actually tried to do that because I wanted to be like Thiele, but I could only make it to 11 hours. That's the most I've ever practiced in one day before I just hit a wall and felt like I had to go to bed. So you really do have to put in time to see marked improvement, but it doesn't have to be 13 hours. It doesn't even have to be 2 hours. You know, when you're first starting out, I think 30 minutes to an hour every day is a really good goal to shoot for. And then maybe take your timer on your phone and set a timer for 10 or 15 minutes and just work on one thing until that buzzer goes off. That way you can break up that chunk into 3 to 6 segments and work on different things for a well-rounded experience. Next up, we have a YouTube comment from Maranka TR3TJ. Thanks so much for being here. Who says, so glad to see you about to hit this milestone. Your videos are top quality and easy to understand. Thank you. I appreciate some insights, so I'll just ask a couple questions that I'm curious about. All right, speed round. First, what inspired you to become a mandolinist? I'll answer that first. So when my dad first heard Nickel Creek on NPR, I think I was about 10 or 11 years old. He went to the local record store downtown Clemson, South Carolina, picked up their self-titled record. That was the first time I'd ever heard a mandolin before and really set me on this path here. All right, next, is there any particular artist you'd like to collaborate with in the future? Well, I mean, Nickel Creek or Chris Thiele would be pretty amazing. 3, what would you recommend I do to ease my nerves whilst performing? You know, I think nerves really comes down to comfort and experience. So at first, nerves are going to be an issue, but that's a good thing because it shows you that this really means a lot. What you're doing is important to you. And the more you perform, the more you go out to the jam, interact with other musicians, it's going to get a lot easier. So I just say do it and do it often, and you're going to get acclimated pretty fast. All right, and 4, what is your favorite kind of food? The best question I've gotten so far. You know, it's kind of basic, but I think pizza might be my favorite food. I probably am part Italian because I love the mandolin and pizza. Let's go to Italy. All right, next is Bronwyn Sinclair over on Facebook. Good to see you, Bronwyn. Bronwyn says, hi, I've been trying for 2 years to do chop chords. I have to do 3-finger chords. My little finger isn't straight, so not possible to do 4 fingers. No matter what I try, I can't get the right sound, and no video anywhere shows close-up left and right hand techniques. That's a big one, yeah. All right, let's see, the chop chord. You know, I think it's kind of crazy that people say you should start with this wild 4-finger shape. Oftentimes you open up a beginner mandolin book and this is the first thing that it shows you to do, which is wild. I don't know. It's like I still have trouble doing that. I know the 3-finger chop chord isn't too bad, but the 4-finger chop chord where you have to get your pinky up on the G string there, that one's pretty brutal. My first tip would be just to start with a higher shape using the exact same fingering. So you can play, instead of a G chord way down here where the frets are further apart, a B chord way up here with your middle finger on the 7th fret. The spacing's a lot tighter, which makes it not too tricky, at least not as tricky as the G. I've also heard from Sierra Hull, who has self-proclaimed smaller hands, who had a similar experience when she was first starting out with the chop chord. And she says how when she's playing the 4-finger chop now, she basically just plays the lower 3 strings of that shape and doesn't worry about stretching her middle finger to the E string. That way it's not as much of a strain, and you're still getting kind of like the better part of the chop chord. I don't even really like to hear that high string quite as much when I'm chopping because it's kind of bright and obtrusive, right? But for some other ideas, I definitely recommend checking out this Unlocking the Chop Chord video that we have here on the channel. It's a little bit old, and if you want to see a nervous David talking in front of the camera, check it out. But there are some maybe helpful exercises to build up finger independence with this shape in particular. Hope that helps, Bronwyn. Question from Instagram: what is the best mandolin you've ever played and you can't say your new Apitius? And man, you've got me there because this thing is really one of the best mandolins I've ever played, and I feel so lucky to get to play it. But besides this one, there's been a few that have stood out. I can't remember any in particular, like serial numbers or years, but I used to live in Nashville, Tennessee, and when I was there, I would go over to Carter Vintage Guitars pretty much every week and check out the new stock that they had there. And out of the mandolins that I would try, I really love like the Gilchrist and the Haydns in particular. There's something about like that mid-range woof that those mandolins have. It sounds warm and woody, but still open and easy to play. And you know, there's some that are better than others, and it varies for even like some of the vintage ones, like the Lloyd Lores that I've gotten to try. Some of them are really good, some of them are not so great. I have gotten to try John Reichman's Lore before, and man, that thing sings. People say that's like the best mandolin in the world. So maybe I'll have to say that one. All right, next up we have a comment from Patreon. This is James Campbell. What's up, James? James says, I like to echo the thoughts and appreciation above your videos. I wish I lived closer to you and could have in-person instruction. Well, maybe someday. That would be great. Maybe we'll meet up at a camp sometime. I'm a mid-advanced Mando player, and I'm wondering what technical practice exercises you do on a daily basis. I go through scales and modes up the neck, but is there anything else I can do? I also feel uninspired by my playing, and all of my solos start to sound the same. Do you experience this? Yes. Do you have any tips for getting over it? Yes. Thanks again for all you do for the 8-string community. Well, there's not one thing that I would do every day. I think now mostly playing mandolin is very project-based for me, where I'm working on something for a specific video, for a gig, or for a recording session. But I will say that the one thing that I think gets you the most bang for your buck and helps out with improvisation and having new ideas for solos is to transcribe other mandolin players' solos. It took me a long time to come around on this, for starters, because it's a really daunting task. You know, sitting down with a recording, slowing it down with like the Amazing Slow Downer or something like that, and figuring out the solo note by note by either writing it out or by learning it and memorizing it as you go along. Crazy daunting. And also, I had this kind of hesitancy about learning another player's solo because I didn't want to just sound like a copycat. I wanted to have my own artistic voice, which kind of held me back from learning from other players. But then once I started doing this, I realized how beneficial it is, because you're not only expanding your vocabulary, getting new ideas for your solo, but you're also measuring yourself against that player when you play along with the recording. You're seeing how loud they're playing, or how long they're holding on to every note, what their 8th note swing is like, all these things. And you start to absorb that stuff almost subconsciously, and becomes a part of who you are as a player. So when I have time to practice just for myself, this is definitely what I would recommend doing, and try to transcribe as many different players as possible so all those different influences can come together, and you can pick out what you like best about all these players to create your own artistic voice. I hope that helps. All right, over on YouTube we have Tom Irish Bones, who says, 2 questions. What is the best bridge material to improve tone? And does a bone nut really make a difference? Thanks so much for the question, Tom. And you know, I've not actually messed around too much with bridge material. Most of the bridges I played have all just been wood, ebony in particular, but I have seen some folks who make saddles out of deer antlers, like Rosa Stringworks, I believe, uses deer antlers. There's also folks who use mother of pearl, but you know, I think ebony is definitely tried and true, and you're gonna get probably more of a warm sound from that. But also the nut does make a difference too. And I think you will find that a bone nut will sound better than a plastic nut. That was definitely my experience when I was comparing some of these beginner mandolins on the wall over here. A lot of them start out with plastic nuts on the low end, and you really get more of a kind of harsh sound from it, I think. One different thing that I've done on most of my main mandolins is that in addition to having a bone nut here, I had a mother of pearl veneer installed just on the E string side, which I think makes it a little bit easier to dig in on those high strings without it sounding too brittle. Got that idea from another great mandolin builder, Dan Voigt, who also made this armrest here. But one other different thing I've seen recently was hanging out with Mike Marshall out in California. I got to play his Lloyd Lord mandolin, which also sounds incredible. And on that mandolin, I'd never seen this before, but he installed a graphite nut, which theoretically makes sense because you see a lot of people put graphite in the nut slots to prevent any string slipping while tuning up, creating weird tuning issues. So if the whole nut is made out of graphite, that mandolin should stay in tune real good. All right, next up we have on Facebook, Jim Hudson. What's up, Jim? Also a Patreon subscriber. Says, I have trouble staying relaxed when playing fast and challenging passages, especially up the neck. I'm using a metronome and ever so gradually increasing the tempo during my practice sessions and trying to keep my shoulders, back, and hands, arms, and neck relaxed. Got any magic to add? Well, I think you've already got the basics there. Staying relaxed is so important. If your shoulders are tensing up or you feel things just tightening, you're definitely not going to be able to play fast. Grab this thing again here, but one thing that was game changer for me was not only practicing from slow to fast, but also practicing from even faster down to what you thought was fast before. Because much like performing in nerves, like we talked about earlier, it's one of those things where you really have to get used to that feeling for it to feel comfortable. And if you're not pushing yourself to even faster tempos, you're never going to feel comfortable at it. So let me pull out my metronome here. Let's say you're working on a tune like Big Scioto, and you're trying to get it up to 120 beats per minute, which is kind of fast. Let's see if I can do it here. Let's say it falls apart there, and you're having trouble getting past that because you're always starting slower and working your way up to 120. So see if you can start way, way faster. Like what about 150 beats per minute? And then work your way back down to 120. So here's 150. It's gonna be tough. You're not gonna play perfectly, that's okay. You're just trying to hang on for dear life without slowing down or having to stop. Let's try it. Next, try it at like 140, right? What would that sound like? A little bit easier. What about 130 now? If we get it down to 120, but that'll feel even easier now. Wow. Night and day difference, right? What felt fast before at 120 now feels like a piece of cake because you felt what it's like at 150, right? Time is relative, and if you're always judging these faster tempos based on a slower tempo, it's gonna seem fast, but if you jump ahead, go even faster, work your way back down, it's gonna seem a lot slower. That's been a game changer trick for me and getting used to what it feels like playing fast. And eventually, the more you do this for like 5 to 10 minutes every day for a couple weeks, you're gonna see some marked improvements in your relaxation and comfort and confidence at these faster tempos. All right, here we have a question from Lydia Piano 24. What's up, Lydia, over on YouTube? How much is your new Apitius worth? How about the old Apitius and the flat iron? Awesome new instrument. Thank you very much. What's your favorite lick? Favorite instrument other than mandolin, assuming that's your fave? And what age did you pick up the mando? Great questions. Well, maybe I'll go in reverse order here. So I started the mandolin when I was 13 years old. I'm 31 now. And I'd started guitar for a couple years before, I think when I was 11, but it didn't really stick. And then when I was 13, my dad surprised me by bringing home an A model Alvarez mandolin, a really cheap instrument from the local music store. And I started playing that. My favorite instrument other than the mandolin, that's a great question. I often wish I could play like a wind instrument. I love the oboe for some reason. It's just such a beautiful instrument. But the skills did not transfer very well from mandolin to oboe, sadly. All right, favorite lick. I think I heard John Reichman play this one time, and since then it's become kind of a go-to lick for me. It's almost like a gypsy jazz lick over your G major chord, where you're encircling chord tones by going a chromatic note beneath the chord tone, and then one note above the scale from that chord tone, and then back down to where you started. Works over other chords as well, but here in the key of G, that's a really nice one. And then how much is this new A Piteous worth? That's a really good question. I'm not entirely sure because Oliver was very kind to basically give this to me as an endorser, but I assume it's quite valuable because his normal mandolins go for, I think, around $12,000, but with all the custom specs I asked for with this torch and wire inlay with the special nut, the string spacing, and the smaller neck that I asked for, I imagine it's a good bit more than that. I think the other Piteous I have would be about $12,000, and then the flat iron, I'm not sure. I bought it for, I think it was about $1,800, but that was, wow, that was almost 15 years ago, I think. That's wild. And I think they've appreciated a lot since. I've seen some flat iron festivals going for maybe between $3,000 and $4,000. It's actually a really great instrument for the price. You don't see too many of the mandolins around that price range that sound as good as they do. Next, we have a question from Andrew Dagel over on Patreon. How's it going, Andrew? He says, at what point did you feel you were good enough to begin learning a second instrument? And was it a desire or a necessity? Man, you're calling me out here. For me, it was definitely a necessity. Like I mentioned before, I started out on guitar, but quickly gave it up when I got to the mandolin. And it wasn't until years later that I returned to the guitar, mostly to play it on stage. You know, I started playing a little bit with other folks in Boston. I started to play some guitar with Tabitha in our band, the Foreign Landers, and even to use guitar for backing tracks for video here. That's been a huge way of me practicing and learning better how to play that instrument. I even play upright bass from time to time now, which I am a terrible bass player. I don't think I could actually jam on that instrument, but I've used it for backing tracks as well. I even recorded upright bass on our recent Foreign Landers album because we wanted to keep it cheap and not have to hire a bass player. So necessity is definitely the mother of invention, and the more you put yourself in situations like that where you just have to play another instrument, the more you learn for sure. You know, if I had my own way, I probably would just stick to the mandolin, but you do learn things about music differently when you approach it from a different instrument, from a different perspective like that. And when you come back to your main instrument, you do have some new ideas, which is cool. All right, here we have Chad Brown Music over on Instagram. What's up, Chad? He says, you are the man. Well, thank you. And he says, been so helpful on my mandolin journey and grateful for you. My introduction to you was through Mile 12 at the Wilkesboro Bluegrass Festival years ago, Merlefest. Awesome. That was a blast. I bought Into the True Country. Oh, thank you. And have given many spins on many drives, wondering at your younger age how you approached writing that. Also, how you got into photo, video, and film editing. That is a throwback. That album is over 10 years old now. I had a blast making it, though. It's kind of like a senior project for me in college. I got Matt Flinner to produce it for me. He was a teacher of mine at the time, and he helped me wrangle up an amazing crew of studio musicians, Ross Martin, Sam Grissman, Christian Settlemeyer, B.B. Bowness on banjo. And yeah, it was so fun recording and writing those tunes as well. My creative process is kind of more pragmatic than some too. I think I had the opportunity to record that record, and at the time I'd only written maybe one or two tunes of my own. But when this opportunity arose, I figured I should definitely do it. And it became this inspiration, this kind of motivation and deadline for me to actually start writing. And so I think I booked the session a few months in advance, and then over the next few weeks just wrote like crazy and wrote as many tunes as I possibly could and just picked the best out of the batch to record for that session. I think it's really helpful when you're being creative is to set parameters for yourself like that. Otherwise, it becomes kind of overwhelming and open-ended where you feel like, oh, I have to write the perfect mandolin instrumental. And then with that high expectation, it becomes oppressive, right? Like everything you write doesn't seem good enough. You scratch through it and try again, when really you're probably letting go of a lot of really good ideas that could flourish if you give them the time to do so. So often when I sit down to write, I'll give myself some guidelines or an incentive to start with, like having to write a tune within 30 minutes. So set a timer when the buzzer goes off. I have to have a tune to show for no matter what. And that often helps me get past that inhibition, that high standard perfectionism that we all have, to actually write something. And then after 30 minutes, you can be a little bit more objective. Be like, okay, that's terrible. I'll scratch this. Or maybe it's really good and I want to work on it for another 30 minutes and see if I can really develop it and flesh it out even more. And often I find that quantity is better than quality. So, if you can write 30 tunes and get 3 really good tunes out of that batch, then that's awesome. And I actually did that. One time I decided to write a new tune every day for 30 days for a whole month. And I think I got more than 3, maybe like 5 or 6 pretty good tunes out of that batch. So the more you write, the more opportunities you have to really create something good. But if you're not writing, or if you're just starting and stopping, then you won't have much to show for it. And then photo and video editing. Yeah, I only got into that a few years ago. It was really because of the pandemic. Me and Tabitha were over in Northern Ireland, and Tabitha picked up a Sony A6000 little mirrorless camera, and we had so much time. I just really enjoyed fooling around with it, figuring out the frame rates and the lighting, and had so much time just to try and create videos. So we made music videos every week with Tabitha and her brothers in the band Cup of Joe. And I started to film these lesson videos, and I really just figured out by trial and error, to be honest. Much like composition, you just learn through doing, and you make mistakes along the way, but every time you create, every time you film something, you have more ideas, you have more refinement surrounding your creative process. So that's been my process, at least. Or here's one from Steve Woods 2408, which up Steve says, what is the best mandolin under $4,999? It's a very specific amount. That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. There's definitely a price gap in the mandolin range where you have some pretty decent beginner mandolins for under $1,000, and then when you get to the intermediate advanced stage, there's not a whole lot beneath like 7,000 or 8,000, sadly. The main exception these days being the Northfield mandolins, which I think are really great. Some of their high-end mandolins do cost a lot, but they do have some models like the Big Mon model and some of their A models that are a bit more affordable. And definitely look online for used options. I'd recommend going to the Mandolin Cafe Classifieds page, which is kind of a dangerous place to be because you always end up lusting after really expensive mandolins, but you might find something there used between maybe $3,000 and $5,000. So best wishes for you. All right, Jacob Thomas is here. What is up, Jacob? Asking, how do I grow my YouTube channel? It says I have over 100 subs, but that is just friends and they don't usually watch the videos. I'm sorry. Man, that is a great question. I'm a big fan of other people making mandolin content, and I wish there were more folks doing it because the more there are, the stronger we are, and the more people we bring into the fold to experience this amazing little instrument. And it is really tough getting started and growing your audience and growing your channel. I think the best advice that I have is just to be consistent and try to create something on a regular basis. And then you're going to learn through doing, like I talked about before. So this Mandolin Monday series became kind of a huge thing for me, just having a weekly accountability partner to make a video and post it on Monday morning. And then now I try to make lesson videos once a week or a few times a month to make sure that I'm continually putting out content and learning from that content to hopefully create better and better videos as I go along. And eventually, if you love the platform, if you love the process of making videos and being creative this way, you're going to find your voice, you're going to find your niche and your audience through that. So best wishes for you. Well, speaking of YouTube, we have a comment from Marcel Ardons from the Lessons with Marcel channel here. And he says, it's time for you to finally address the fact that you bought the same lamp as me and then bullied me into changing my lamp. The truth must come out. Are you sure I didn't have this lamp first? I know I copy a lot from your channel, Marcel, but I'm keeping the lamp. All right, next we have Steve Forrester Paintings from Instagram. What's up, Steve? Wondering when you're creating music, how do you notate it without an electronic program? Or do you always use a computer to write things out? Yeah, I think for me, I mostly write things out on a computer. I don't use paper too much anymore. I did when I was in college before having a notation program, but as soon as I got Finale and started to learn how to use it, it became much faster and easier to notate it on a computer than on paper. My dog Finn is agreeing with me. Sometimes as a writing exercise, I will go back to pen and paper just because it's a different experience writing it out, and having the permanence of ink too makes me write different because I know I can't just go back and change it like I can on the program. And like I said, I use a program called Finale, but I often don't recommend it to folks because it's pretty expensive and it may not be the best option for mandolin, but I just learned how to use that in college and I found a way of making it work for what I do here online. But there's some other great options too. Like MuseScore is a free notation program that has some pretty good mandolin tablature options. And then Sibelius is also a big one people use. It's kind of expensive. Another one I've not used before, but a lot of YouTubers here, Bluetubers, use it. It's called Guitar Pro, and I know it works great for guitar and banjo. Probably works well for mandolin too. Back to Patreon here. Here we have Ben Nulan saying, I'd love to hear you talk about amateur musicians and their place in the musical community. As someone who's married to a professional musician, I've seen firsthand what that talent and work ethic looks like. I know I'm never going to get there, and I've made my peace with that, but it took a long time. Now I'm trying to wrap my head around a philosophy of amateur musicianship, kind of a positive statement of the importance of amateurs in the musical ecosystem. I'd love to hear your thoughts along those lines, especially as someone who does so much to support the musical learning community. Oh, thank you. Also, I echo the thanks and appreciation for your work already posted here. I'm a relatively new subscriber, but I'm already well and truly hooked. Awesome to have you with us here, Ben. Ben, man, I think you do yourself a discredit by playing down your ability so much. I'm tempted to do the same thing myself, but I think we're all really important as musicians. And at some level, too, music is weird because your proficiency, your technical proficiency, doesn't always compute with your artistry. And there's this quote I really love from the legendary John Hartford, who said something along the lines that finding your artistic voice is simply learning how to operate within your own limitations, which I think is beautiful and so true. You know, there's some mandolin players that aren't technically as proficient as others, but I might like to listen to more because they've learned how to operate within those limitations and really hone their artistic voice through it. Amateurs are so important, especially for the furtherance of this music here with the mandolin, because, you know, I was an amateur at one point and benefited so much from the mentorship and the inspiration from other mandolin players like Mike Marshall, Matt Flinner, other folks. And now I wouldn't be able to do what I do without other people learning about the mandolin and coming into the fold. And I just love getting to share my joy at this instrument with other people. And I hope at some point, you know, the tables will be turned and all these other people will be sharing the joy of this instrument with other people as well. And we'll be stronger together. Mandolin Chad from Instagram here next. I love this question. He asks, what living mandolin player has had the most influence on your style? And I have to say, without a doubt, it would have to be Matt Flinner. Matt was my teacher for a few years in college. And before that, you know, I'd had one-off lessons here and there, but I never had a dedicated mandolin instructor that I met with on a regular basis. And he just opened up my eyes to so many new things on the mandolin. Before Flinner, I never really listened to David Grisman. I never listened to Sierra Hull. I never listened to Mike Compton or any of these other great mandolin players that I know and love today. He also got me learning by ear at a different level too. Before, I was mostly relying on tab and notation to learn tunes, but he got me listening to those artists and then transcribing melodies and transcribing solos like I was talking about, which really kicked things up a notch for me at a different level. But also, I just really click with his artistic style. Like his tune writing style makes so much sense to me. Like his approach to the mandolin too. I love his pragmatic approach to writing tunes. I don't know if you've heard about his music du jour tours where he and his trio members will each write a new tune before the show, the day of the show, to perform at that show, which is crazy. But, you know, over many years of doing it, they've written like thousands of tunes and gotten some really cool stuff from it. Matt also produced 2 records for me, that Into the True Country album I mentioned earlier, and another one called The Golden Angle. And he helped me work on my compositions, refine them, helped me get my arrangements together, and then helped us in the studio make sure we got the best takes. And yeah, I just owe so much to Matt. And you should definitely check out his stuff if you haven't already. He's got some incredible records. He has some amazing online learning resources. So enjoy, and huge thanks to Matt. All right, Patreon here. Randy Brinson, what's up, Randy? Says, hi, David. How does one determine the optimal string height for their mandolin? I gather string gauge and strength of pick stroke play into this. Pardon the pun. Good one. Are there other factors? What should I be thinking about when adjusting bridge height? Thanks for that question, Randy. You know, I was very wary about changing the action on my mandolin when I first started playing. I thought you had to be really specific about the measurements and make sure to lower each knob the exact same amount or else you risk damaging things. When I've come to realize that's not really the case. It's more of an art than a science, and most people seem to go off of feel rather than exact measurements. So I'd say just try it. You know, if the mandolin feels like it's too quiet or you're getting some string buzz, maybe try raising the action a little bit. Or if it feels too hard to hold down the strings with your left hand, then try lowering it a bit. Just minor adjustments and keeping track of how many turns you do on each side so that you can reverse it later on if you need to. You can even make minor adjustments to one side and not the other too. So if your G strings feel too low to the fretboard, you can raise this side without raising the E string side to see what it feels like. And when you're raising the action, it's probably good to loosen the string tension a bit so that you're not putting undue pressure on the saddle here. But when you're lowering the action, I often will just take some pliers and turn these knobs to the right to get them a little bit lower without having to detune everything and tune it back up again, which is such a hassle, I know. So action becomes kind of this fun thing where you get to make these minor tweaks and see what it does to your playing and your instrument there. Good luck. All right, one more question from Instagram here. What is your favorite fiddle tune? Ooh, very good one. And how do you approach different genres? I'm joining my school's jazz ensemble next year, and I'm going to be playing a 5-string Blue Star Mando. Ah, very cool. You know, I have a 5-string electric hanging up on the wall here. I think it's a Blue Star Mando Blaster, I believe. But you know, the pickups aren't working on it, and I need to get it repaired because it is so fun to play. And I know you're gonna have a blast playing in this jazz ensemble. That's amazing. As far as my favorite fiddle tune, you know, one that I really love is that tune Cazadero by the fiddle player Paul Shalasky. Paul used to play with John Reichman out in California in a great band called the Good Old Persons. And then John recorded that tune Cazadero on a solo record of his called North of the Border. I don't know if there's any other recordings before that, but that's a great one. And then Chris Thile with basically the Punch Brothers recorded the same tune on a Chris Thile record called How to Grow a Woman from the Ground. And it's so fun. You know, it's 4 parts. It's in the key of E major. It's kind of a challenging tune to play, and it has some crazy fingering, some right hand things to do. So I often find myself just picking up a mandolin and playing this one because it's very rewarding. Such a beautiful melody too. Cazadero. We'll have to check it out here on the site at some point, I imagine. And then, how do you approach different genres? You know, that's a great question. I am not as well versed in other genres as I probably should be. I mostly stick to the bluegrass and old time, but I love playing Celtic music and been trying to get more into that recently. And I've found that the best thing to do is to really listen to source recordings from important players in the genre that you're trying to learn. So I've been listening to a lot of Andy Irvine and Paul Brady and stuff from the Chieftains, and yeah, it's been so informative because by listening to those recordings and playing along with them, you're really going straight to that source. You're learning it from the people who made this music to be what it is. So if you're working on jazz, I definitely recommend listening to some Jethro Burns and to Don Sternberg and Paul Glass, all these folks. Seeing if you can maybe transcribe some solos from them or just learn the changes to some of these swing tunes that they're playing on their records and play along with them. Get a sense for what they're doing, what they're not doing. And it's really going to inform the way that you approach learning tunes in that genre from that point on. All right. 50,000 subs. Oh my goodness. Just huge thanks again for coming with me on this journey. Thanks to all the folks who submitted questions, and let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see some full-length lessons on any of the topics that we talked about here. And huge thanks in particular to all the folks over on Patreon. Without your generous support, none of these videos would be possible. And if you'd like to learn more about all the extra learning resources like the tab and recordings that we have over on the site, you can check out more at the link down below. And in the meantime, man, loads more videos coming here on our road to 100,000. Do you think we can do it? Do you think there's 100,000 people out there who know about this 8-stringed instrument? That would be pretty amazing. Let's find out together. I'll see you then.